Thank you everyone. Oh, got it. Thank you everyone too for tuning in to learn more about paid leave. We're so grateful to the Danbury Library for hosting us to provide more information about the Connecticut Paid Leave Program and how to apply for benefits. Before we dive into our presentation, I just want to thank and introduce Senator Julie Kushner to say a few words about paid leave. Senator Kushner, as we know, is a real paid leave champion and led passage of the law in 2019. So we're so grateful for you for being here. Also to Representative Godfrey, thank you so much for tuning in to learn more. So yeah, Senator Kushner, I'll turn it to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maddie and Jessica. It's good to see you. And I'll just say a few words. When I ran in 2018 to represent Danbury and the rest of the 24th district, I ran on a campaign that we needed to get a $15 minimum wage and paid family medical leave. And I'm happy to say in 2019, when I sat in the legislature as the chair of the Labor Committee, we were actually successful in getting both of those programs.
You're muted.
Yeah, I got muted. It's okay. We were successful in 2019 in establishing both of my top goals, and I was really happy about that. I want to talk about paid family medical leave. As a mother of 3 kids and now 4 grandkids, I have been fighting for paid leave so that workers wouldn't have to make the hard choice between taking care of a loved one and paying their bills. And I started working on this when I was a young mother in the 1990s, when we first passed the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Program in Washington, D.C. But I knew then, and I continued to fight for, that it would only work if workers got compensation, because no one could afford to take the time off, or very few people could afford that. And sometimes you didn't have a choice and you struggled to pay your bills. And some people even really, found it impossible to survive and take care of their family. So we wanted to fix that, and we did. And we have this wonderful program. We created the Paid Leave Authority, and you're going to hear from them. They're going to tell you about the benefits that you can get when you need to take a paid family medical leave. I will say this, though. For those of you who might be thinking about using it for the first time, it's very exciting. I ran into a guy the other day here in Danbury who said he wanted to thank me because he had twins recently. His wife had twins. And when his first child was born 2.5 years ago, we didn't have a paid leave program. And his wife and he both got very limited leave time. And today, his wife is taking 12 weeks. And when she finishes her leave, he will take 12 weeks. And this new, family, these great new twins that are coming into our community will have had parents at home with them for 12 weeks. For 24 weeks, because they both will be able to take leave. This is just a phenomenal program and something that we're also proud of in the legislature. And what we especially are thankful for is that we have the authority who are running this in such a great fashion. So Maddie and Jessica, thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you to all of the board of trustees and to the director who really have been able to stand up this program for the people of Connecticut. And it's making a real difference in people's lives. So I'm happy to join you tonight, and we'll listen to the presentation. And if you have any questions that are legislative questions, I'm happy to answer those. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Kushner. So now we will get into our training, and I will turn it to my colleague, Jessica Vargas, who is Connecticut Paid Leave's Chief Marketing and Communications Officer. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Maddie. And thank you, Senator and Representative, for being here. And thank you to all of you who took some time this evening to come and hear about our program. So I have a short slide deck that I'll go through, and please, feel free to ask questions at any point. You can put them in the chat. You can wait until the end if you want, but we definitely want to make sure that we answer all your questions. So don't be shy. All right. So before I get into the slides, I'll just wanted to share kind of at our most recent glance we have had over 85,000 people in Connecticut receive Connecticut paid leave benefits to the tune of nearly $550 million. So it's really, in just 2 short years, made a tremendous impact on people's lives. And, you know, both for the wonderful things like you heard Senator Kushner talk about, welcoming a new child into the home, but also when folks are struggling with some, you know, really unfortunate things like an ill family member or their own, you know, need to have a surgery or something like that. And, you know, I know myself, Maddie, all of our colleagues, we do this work because we feel so strongly about why this program exists and the fact that we don't ever want anyone to have to struggle and make that hard decision about, do I get the treatment I need or do I go to work? So we hope that you will get some good information out of this program. And if you ever do need it, please know that we and all of our colleagues are here to help you access the benefits. So a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to talk about, as Senator Kushner referenced, FMLA, which is a really important law, but we're going to talk about the differences between that law and Connecticut paid leave and also how they work together because they really do go hand in hand. We'll talk about the 6 different qualifying reasons that someone can take leave. We'll talk about the definition of family, and Connecticut has a very expansive definition of family, which is wonderful and really important to know because sometimes family is not just the folks that we are biologically or legally related to. It could be our chosen family as well. Then we'll get into some of the sort of nitty gritty about who's a covered employer, how long is leave, and how can you kind of take it in terms of like, does it have to be all at once or can it be broken up? We'll just give you some information if you're a sole proprietor or self-employed or you know someone who is. This program is available to those individuals as well. And then we'll talk about how to file a claim, things to keep in mind. And then if your claim is denied, what can you do? Because we do want to make sure that if you are eligible for this program, you can receive those benefits. So we'll start with the difference between paid leave and FMLA. You may be familiar with FMLA. It stands for the Family and Medical Leave Act, and it's been around for over 30 years. There's both a federal law and a state of Connecticut law. And what these laws do is allow you to take job protected time away from work for certain qualifying family and medical reasons. However, there is no income replacement that's guaranteed with FMLA. So it allows you to return to your same job or an equivalent one after your leave is over, but it doesn't necessarily provide you with any income replacement. Now, FMLA is actually implemented by the employer and is overseen by the state and the federal departments of labor. So Connecticut paid leave really fills that gap. You have someone who has one of these qualifying reasons, they need to take that time and their job is protected by FMLA. But if they don't have income replacement through their employer, how are they really going to make it work? How are they going to make ends meet while they're taking that time off? So the Connecticut Paid Leave Act is the law that creates that source of income replacement benefits for folks when they are out of work for those FMLA qualified reasons. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the paid leave law does not provide that job protected leave. So that's why FMLA and paid leave work hand in hand. If you are going out on leave, you're going to want to apply to your employer for FMLA so that you have that job protection. And then to us at the Paid Leave Authority, which is a quasi-public agency of the state of Connecticut, for the income replacement. So it really is sort of a two-piece process. Now, the Family and Medical Leave Act and Connecticut Paid Leave intersect in that they both apply to most businesses in Connecticut with 1 or more workers. So this is something that Connecticut's Family and Medical Leave Act changed pretty significantly when the Connecticut Paid Leave law was passed as well. And it now provides that job protected leave after 3 months of employment. It used to be not until 12 months of employment. So that's a pretty substantial change and important to know. We're going to talk about the eligibility for Connecticut paid leave, but it's not based on a certain length of time of employment. It's rather based on working for a covered employer and having met a minimum earnings requirement. And I'll get into more of those details. But important to know that if you work for an employer with 1 or more people working in Connecticut, you are more than likely going to be potentially eligible for both that job protection from FMLA and the income replacement from paid leave. So how does paid leave work? It's funded through a deduction that employers take from their employee paychecks. We call those contributions. So it's a small amount. It's 1/2 of 1% that your employer automatically deducts. And they send those contributions to us quarterly at the Paid Leave Authority. They go into a trust fund. So then when someone needs paid leave benefits, they apply to us and the funds come out of that overall trust. Again, if someone wants that job protected leave, which in almost all cases, someone does want to be able to come back to their job after their leave ends, they'll apply directly to their employer for that FMLA. So we do want to make sure that that folks know what that deduction is for on their paychecks. You might see it as FMLA or PFMLA or CTPL, but that's what that deduction is, and that's what makes this whole program possible. There are 6 different qualifying reasons. These are reasons that you can qualify for job protected leave under Connecticut FMLA, as well as paid leave under the Connecticut Paid Leave Program. The most common reason, over 50% of the requests for paid leave benefits that we see, are for medical leave, which is for someone to receive treatment for their own serious health condition. Now, serving as an organ or a bone marrow donor is a serious health condition, as is pregnancy. There is a specific definition that's written into the statute about what constitutes a serious health condition, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. The second most common reason people apply for benefits is bonding leave. So that's leave to bond with a newborn child or a newly placed child that has entered your home through a foster care placement or adoption. It can be used by both parents, as Senator Kushner alluded to. And it can also be used at any time during the 12 months immediately following the child's birth or placement. So for example, in the example we heard from Senator Kushner, the birth mother is taking 12 weeks, and then when she goes back to work, the father will take his 12 weeks, which is great because it extends that period of time that parents can be home, have that bonding before they need to make childcare arrangements. In the case of adoption or foster care, this leave can also be used for those pre-placement activities that might be necessary, such as court meetings or travel or things of that nature. Third most common type of leave is caregiver leave. This is leave to provide care for a family member who's experiencing a serious health condition. And remember, I mentioned at the beginning that Connecticut has an expansive definition of family, and we're going to talk about just who that includes. We have 2 types of leave that apply to the military. There's military caregiver leave, so that would be to care for a family member who was injured during active duty in the military. And then qualifying exigency leave. This is really a much lesser known type of leave, but it is for the spouse, child, or parent of an active duty military member who's been notified of an impending call or deployment. So this could be if the military member is notified they're going to be deployed, and maybe the spouse needs to take some time off from work so that they can go and see their attorney together or make some banking arrangements, or maybe attend the sending off ceremony or the welcome home ceremony. That's what qualifying exigency leave would be used for. And then lastly, here in Connecticut, we have something called the Family Violence Leave Act. This is actually, it does provide job protected leave and income replacement. It's separate from Connecticut FMLA, but it does provide that job protection as well. And this is for a person who is the victim of family violence to receive that job protection and that income replacement for specific reasons, which include seeking medical or psychological care or counseling, going to a victim services organization, relocating due to that family violence, or participating in court proceedings. And the Family Violence Leave Act provides for up to 12 days in a calendar year for those specific reasons. Now, you heard me mention a serious health condition a couple of times. So what is a serious health condition? It essentially boils down to that the person has to be both incapacitated and under the treatment of a healthcare provider. This can take a lot of different forms. These are just a couple of examples, but something that would land someone for an overnight stay in the hospital is very likely a serious health condition. But it could also be something like a chronic condition that the individual is seeing their healthcare provider at least 2 times a year for treatment and maintenance of that condition. It could be a long-term condition for which treatment is no longer effective, but the patient is still under medical supervision. That could be something like the terminal stages of cancer. And incapacitation during pregnancy, which really can also be just your routine prenatal appointments. It doesn't have to be complications that occur during the pregnancy. It could just be for that prenatal care. These are just a couple of examples. But what would not qualify as a serious health condition is, for example, unfortunately, we all know it's the time of year when the flu starts going around and things like that. If you are ill, but you are able, your healthcare provider maybe says, stay home, use your over-the-counter meds, drink your fluids, rest, stay away from people, but I don't need to see you in the office unless you get worse or something like that. That's not necessarily going to be a serious health condition. However, you might have some other condition that is made worse by having the flu, for example. We get a lot of questions about COVID. COVID in and of itself is not always a serious health condition, but if you develop long COVID, that certainly would be. So we just want to make sure people understand this is not for your sort of run-of-the-mill illnesses where you have to be out of work for a day or two. This is really for those bigger, more serious conditions that need that ongoing treatment. Now let's talk about who's a family member. So under caregiver leave, in Connecticut, we have this expanded definition. So just to give you a basis for comparison, under federal FMLA, an employee can only take leave to care for a parent, a spouse, a child under 18 or over 18 if they have a disability. So siblings, grandparents, those kind of relationships would not be covered under the federal FMLA. But in Connecticut, the relationships that are covered are not only parents, spouses, and children of any age, but also siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, and any individual related by blood or affinity. So what does that mean? It means that if the employee shares a close personal relationship that is like one of those relationships that you just saw, regardless of if there's a biological or legal relationship, that person could take caregiver leave to care for that person under this definition of related by affinity. What does that look like? Let's say there's an aunt or an uncle who relies on the employee for unpaid care, and they really have a relationship that is more like what you normally see between a mom and a child. Another example, and a pretty common example, is an unmarried significant other of the employee. They might live together, have kids together, but they're not legally married. Connecticut does not recognize common law marriage or domestic partnerships. So under the federal law, those individuals would not be able to take time off to care for each other and have that job protection. But here in Connecticut, they would, and they would also be able to apply for paid leave benefits because of this definition of relationship by affinity. So this is a really important part of our law that really recognizes that family comes in a lot of different forms. It's not just the people that, we're legally related to or blood related to. Sometimes it's our chosen family. Sometimes it's, our best friend who's like a sister that we grew up with, and that person needs care and we want to be there for them. Now we'll get into eligibility. So you do have to work for a covered employer in order to be eligible for Connecticut paid leave. And as I mentioned earlier, most employers with one or more people working in Connecticut are covered. Non-unionized employees of the state of Connecticut are also covered. But there are a few exceptions who are not covered by Connecticut paid leave, and those include the federal government, municipalities and boards of education, although there is a provision where their unionized employees can collectively bargain to participate. Non-public elementary and secondary schools are also not covered, nor are railroads, the governments of other states, or sovereign nations. And then additionally, there are some individuals who are excluded from paid leave, such as interstate truck drivers who might work in Connecticut but live in another state and not pay income tax here, and then spouses of active duty military who are paying taxes in their home state instead of where they're currently deployed. Now, the second thing that we look at is, did you meet our minimum earnings requirement? And this chart is just to kind of help you visualize it, because when you hear the words, it can sound a little confusing. So I always like visuals. So the minimum earnings requirement is that you have earned at least $2,325 in the highest earning quarter of the first 4 of the 5 most recently completed quarters. What does that look like? So if you were applying for benefits now in this 4th quarter of the year, so this October, November, December timeframe, we would be looking back at the 4 quarters that you see in green. So essentially July of 2022 through June of 2023. That's what we call the base period. And we're going to look and see that you've earned at least $2,325 in one of those periods. This can come from one or more covered employers. So if you work 2 part-time jobs, for example, and they're both covered employers, we will combine those earnings to see if you've hit that 2325. So rather than this being based on a certain number of hours worked or full-time, this really makes it so that this program can apply to folks who work part-time, per diem, maybe they work seasonally, and it allows them to combine those earnings. And then the third thing that we look at is you must be either currently employed by a covered employer in Connecticut, or if you're not, you had been at some point within the 12 weeks before your claim. So maybe you just started a new job and it's not with a covered employer, but prior to that, you were working with a covered employer. You can still access these benefits, even if your current employer is not covered. Now, this is just for information. This is not anything that you have to worry about. If you do a claim for paid leave benefits, we at the authority will look at this information. We work with the Department of Labor to validate wages. So we'll go through all this and look at the eligibility. Now, what about sole proprietors and self-employed individuals? They are not required by law to participate in the program, but they do have an option to participate if they would like to do so. A couple of sort of special considerations for sole proprietors and self-employed. One thing is that they do have to reside in Connecticut in order to participate. With employees, they don't have to reside in Connecticut as long as they work for that covered Connecticut employer. So Danbury, for example, being very close to the New York border, if someone lives in New York, but they work in Connecticut, they can qualify for paid leave if they're an employee. But as a sole proprietor, they would need to also live in Connecticut in order to opt into the program. Other considerations is that the coverage would begin on the first day of the month following 3 full calendar months after they enroll. So for example, if they enrolled in December, January, February, March would be your 3 months. And so April 1st is when they would become eligible for benefits. They do have to remain in the program for at least 3 years if they opt in. And their contribution rate is the same as all other employees. So it's 0.5% of their self-employment income. And then a sole proprietor who has employees can decide that they don't want to opt in for themselves, but they do have to still deduct and remit for their employees. And if they receive a W-2, then they're actually an employee of their own company. So then they do have to participate in the program. Now we're going to talk about the types of leave. So essentially, there are 3 different ways that you can use your time. The most common way we see is block leave. It's also called continuous leave. And this is when someone is going to be out of work for a continuous period of time for a single qualifying reason. So for example, someone's going to have a surgery. Their healthcare provider says, you're going to need to be out of work for 6 full weeks to recover. You can't work at all. That's a block leave. There's also reduced schedule leave. So that's where someone reduces the amount of time that they normally work, typically from a full-time schedule to a part-time schedule. Maybe someone normally works from 9 to 5, but let's say they're undergoing some sort of a treatment or they've got some sort of a health condition where their doctor says, I really only want you, working from 9 to 2 for the next, month or 2 months. And then lastly, there's intermittent leave. And this is leave where someone is going to be absent from work sporadically for relatively small amounts of time. It could be for things that are planned. It could also be for things that are unplanned. So if we take the person who had surgery, they're out for 6 full weeks, then their doctor says they can go back to work, but they have to do physical therapy twice a week for 4 more weeks. They could then use intermittent leave in order to receive payment for that time that they're taking off for their physical therapy sessions. But it could also be used if someone has some sort of a chronic condition that maybe it flares up and they can't really predict when that's going to happen. Maybe they don't know when they're going to get that really terrible migraine that makes it so they can't even get out of bed. Intermittent leave can be used for that as well. In terms of the length of time that's available, there's up to 12 weeks available in a 12-month period for most of the leave reasons that we reviewed previously. Also, which is something that's unique to Connecticut, both FMLA and paid leave, is that we have an additional 2 weeks for incapacitation during pregnancy. So while someone is pregnant, if they have some sort of a complication, whether or not it's related to their pregnancy, they can have that additional 2 weeks. But it can also, again, be used for that routine care, those routine prenatal appointments that they need before the child is born. And then, as I mentioned previously, up to 12 days of those 12 weeks can be used for the specific reasons related to family violence. That's not to say that someone who is experiencing family violence could very well have a serious health condition. And in that case, we would certainly, try to approve them for the full 12 weeks in order to receive that treatment for that serious health condition. Now we'll jump back to FMLA just for a minute, because again, this is the laws that provide job protected leave and the ability for you to return to your job after you recover. So we want to make sure that we're clear on what that does. So under the federal law, it is employers with 50 or more people within a 75-mile radius. So slightly larger employers, government entities of any size are covered under federal FMLA. Connecticut FMLA very closely mirrors the Connecticut paid leave covered employers. So it's almost all employers with 1 or more people working in Connecticut. And all state of Connecticut employees are also covered. But those exclusions from Connecticut FMLA are the same as the exclusions from the Connecticut paid leave program. Now, in terms of eligibility on the federal side, to be eligible for job protected leave, a person must have been employed by the company for at least 12 months and worked 1,250 hours. In Connecticut, as I mentioned, our law changed a few years ago, and now is after 3 months of employment, there's no longer any hours worked requirement for Connecticut FMLA, which is great because now people who work part-time, per diem, seasonally, all those things can still qualify for Connecticut FMLA. Again, FMLA is always something that's between the employer and the employee. So the employer has to look at the eligibility and the specific person and see if they fit into that eligibility criteria. Another change that happened with Connecticut FMLA a few years ago is that the length of time changed so that it really more closely mirrors the federal statute. So both federal and state FMLA provide up to 12 weeks in a 12-month period for most FMLA reasons. And they both provide up to 26 weeks for military caregiver leave. What's unique about Connecticut, again, is that we have those additional 2 weeks for pregnancy that can be used before the child is born. And then the Family Violence Leave Act has those 12 days available. So I know that's a lot of information. But if you're thinking, hey, I know of something coming up, a surgery, a baby, family member who's got something going on, and I think I'm going to need to apply for Connecticut paid leave benefits, how can you do that? So we try to make it as easy as possible. If you are so inclined to go online, that's what we recommend because it's really the quickest and easiest way, and it allows you to have all your information contained in an online portal where you can access it really easily, and you can do that right through our website at ctpaidleave.org. We do know that not everybody loves technology, and that's fine, so we do also have an option for someone to call in to that 877 number that you see. That will go to our dedicated Connecticut paid leave team at AFLAC, who's our third-party claims administrator. We work with them really closely, so that number will go specifically to our paid leave team. When you call in or when you start your application online, you'll let us know the leave reason. So I'm having a child, I'm taking medical leave for my own condition. And after that, we'll send you a notice with the documentation that we're going to need. So there's really 3 buckets of documentation. It's not a lot of documentation, but we do need to get some information before we can make a claim decision. So it's identity verification, which most often people will do the front and back of their license, but there are definitely other forms we can take. Employment verification, which is a short 2-page form that you would give to your employer and they would fill it out. Ask questions about your typical work schedule, as well as any income replacement you might be getting from your employer. For example, maybe you've got a week of PTO that you want to use before your paid leave kicks in. So we just need to know those things so we can coordinate and make sure we're paying appropriately. And then there will be documents supporting your specific leave reason. If it's your own serious health condition, it'll be a form that your healthcare provider fills out. If it's for adoption, it might be, some records from the adoption agency, for example. Once we have all of that information, our claims administrator can review it and they can make a claim decision. If it's approved, the benefits are issued directly to you, the individual, either through direct deposit or a prepaid Visa debit card. Benefits are issued on Tuesdays. It's very seamless. There are a couple things we want to make sure that everyone keeps in mind. These are just things that we see sometimes trip people up when they're applying. So we want to address them up front and make sure that we can kind of try to, avoid them from happening. So one thing is that your application is really not complete until you submit all of the documentation that we've requested. And that's really just because without it, we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle to determine your eligibility. So we do need all of those documents. There also is a due date on the notice that we'll send you where we say, hey, here's what we need you to fill out. There's a due date on that notice. It's usually about 3 weeks out from when you start your application. We understand sometimes your doctor's gone away for a couple of weeks, or the HR person is out. If you need an extension, that is completely fine. You just need to let us know by calling, by sending a message through the online portal. We can certainly grant an extension. That is never a problem. We talked about the fact that not all illnesses qualify as a serious health condition. That's why it's really important that if it is for medical leave, you have your healthcare provider fill out that it's called the certification of a serious health condition form, because that will give us the information that we need to say, hey, this really is something that falls into that statutory definition of a serious health condition. And we try to make it as easy as possible. If your doctor's already filled out a similar form for FMLA, that's fine. We'll take that form. We don't want to make anybody jump through hoops. So that's certainly fine. And then lastly is that if there are any changes that happen, so maybe things are going great and you're recovering quickly and you're going to go back to work sooner than you thought, or maybe your doctor says you need a little bit more time. We just need to know that so that we can make sure that we're not over or underpaying you. Now, if a claim is denied, this does happen sometimes, and typically the reason for denial is just not having all of that paperwork or inconsistencies in the paperwork. So if your doctor says you need to be out from date A to date B and your employer puts different dates on the paperwork, that might cause a denial. But we offer a reconsideration process. So let's say you're denied and you find out it's because your doctor forgot to fill out a section of the form that they needed to fill out. You can just fill out a reconsideration form. It's 1 page, quick and easy. You say, hey, notice my doctor didn't fill out this part of the form. It's been filled out now. Here you go. And we can look at that case again and hopefully make an approval decision. If for some reason you don't want to go through that process, or if you do and you're still denied and you feel like that was not the right decision, you can file an appeal with the Connecticut Department of Labor. They hear appeals for the Connecticut Paid Leave Program. They also oversee FMLA. So if you had any problems with your FMLA, you could also go to the Connecticut Department of Labor. So I know that's a lot of information. I've been doing this presentation for 3 years, and every time I do, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much. And I know it like the back of my hand. So I can only imagine how much it is for everyone to take in. We do want to leave you with some resources. So our website, ctpaidleave.org, is a great place to go. We have just revamped it, and we put a lot of additional content on there, including videos and pamphlets, and it can be translated into, I think, 8 or 9 different languages. So that's a great resource. If someone's already filed a claim and they have questions, we would recommend that they first reach out through the portal or by calling AFLAC. Of course, though, if they hit any roadblocks, certainly just come to us. There's a contact us tab on our website where you can send in a request and then we can call you. We have bilingual agents available, so we want to help you, get everything figured out. Again, Connecticut FMLA is overseen by the Connecticut Department of Labor. there's a link to their sort of dedicated page on their website that's all about FMLA, as well as the phone number and email address. And then also the link to the Federal Department of Labor.